So I really hate discussing a subject unless I've fully reconciled it in my mind. And I haven't done that with this subject, but I'm gonna talk about it anyways. I spent like almost an entire year kind of being alone and just working on myself. And just kind of like doing research and like kind of just going wherever my mind wanted me to go. And during this time, I received a lot of insights, and it was a real practice in using my dominant cognitive function, which is introverted intuition. And I feel like there's a few factors that need to be apparent in order for you to have the maximum benefit of your introverted intuition. And that is 1, quiet, 2, calm, 3, void of emotion, or not void of emotion, but just a baseline of emotion, not too emotional. And then 4 would be sans a time constraint. And if you have those things, then it's really easy for you to use your introverted intuition and to use it well. And as much as I really enjoy that time being alone, you can't really just do that and have a life. You can't, stay alone and like not earn money for yourself and not go out into the world. And it's difficult a lot of times because the world is very sensory. It's built and set up, and most of the systems, are made for sensors. I'm not really sure on, the ratio of sensors to intuitives, but it feels like there's fewer intuitives than there are sensors. That's just the way it is. And it's hard to explain the introverted intuitive process. Okay, I would explain it like this. Like, say you want to cook a meal. What you're gonna do instead of like following a recipe or following directions is you're just going to take all these ingredients that you already have in your cabinet in your refrigerator and just start mixing them together, and somehow you end up with this fabulous meal. And that's kind of the way that it is with your intuition. It's just like you have this subconscious or unconscious, whichever you prefer, data bank. And if you're quiet, then something just forms together. It's like your memory and your imagination kind of like twist around to give you, answers or to predict future outcomes or whatever it may be. And it's so hard to use this in a world where time is such a factor and we're always so busy, and we have these all these different kind of like worldly constraints put upon us. So I have been using the past, I'd say, year to get grounded and work on my inferior cognitive function, which is extroverted sensing. And I feel like even though that's my inferior function, it doesn't mean that I use it the least, but it's kind of like I almost get overwhelmed by sensory stimuli. Like, it's just too much. Like, if, and I feel like kind of like what I'm explaining is like halfway spiritual and halfway psychological. And you can look at it from both perspectives. Like, I'm really into like kind of the word empath and what empaths are as a spiritual explanation, and then also what kind of INFJs and INTJs are as far as like a more psychological perspective. Even though I get overwhelmed by sensory stimuli, it's important to kind of build up that inferior function, because according to a lot of the research I've done, the more you build that up, the better that you can use your intuition. And what sensory data is just like, it's more information for your introverted intuition to use. So it's kind of like, what I'll do is I'll practice being sensory at times where I have to be sensory. Like, it's a necessity to be sensory, like driving, for instance. Like, I know a lot of people say they kind of like zone out while driving. Like, I don't do that. I use that as a time to be very like aware and present and like focus on everything. And I used to have this thing where I would get really anxious when I was driving and like kind of like have these panic attacks. And I found a few ways to kind of like cheat the system where, I do things so that I can like be calmer in the present moment. A lot of those things, like even like just something simple like chewing gum. Like, I'll chew gum and it'll give my brain kind of like a distraction to like be able to focus a little bit more. I'll chew the hell out of that gum. Right now I'm like really into fireballs. I was eating sunflower seeds, but that kind of like, you can't do that while doing other things in life. So you just kind of have to be sitting around. But yeah, I'll chew gum. I've really gotten into like trance music or whatever, just like something with a really like simple, repetitive beat. And I use them directly in my headphones. Some people might say that it's like not safe to drive with your headphones in, but I don't, pump the volume all the way up. I just have it like going directly into my ears so that I don't know, it does something. It just helps me focus. I knew this cop once that used to listen to classical music while he was driving, and really wordless music, it does something for specifically, I think, like introverted, intuitive people, to where it just kind of like relaxes your mind, because that sensory stimuli is like so overwhelming. Like, if you are an empath or an introverted intuitive, then you know that like loud noises, crowds, bright lights, like all those things are like super overwhelming. Like, it's just like even like the smallest things. Like, if I hear like a really high pitched noise, like a anything, like a little squeaky noise, it like freaks me out so bad to where I have to like get away from it, even if it's like it doesn't last that long. It just does something to my brain. And the same with the crowds and everything. It's almost like energy is just so palpable that it's like you can feel it all throughout your body. And I haven't completely reconciled everything. I just find it fascinating, like neuroscience and certain research regarding like ADHD, extreme anxiety, Asperger's, high functioning autism, like things like that involve the nervous system. And even like a recent study that I read on research with mirror neurons and how that might relate to empathy. Like, I just think it's so fascinating that people like us might have an overabundance of these specific neurons, and that's why we're affected by things in the way that we are. And maybe I'll never figure out exactly how to like use my introverted intuition perfectly, but I feel like I've been on a mission to kind of like at least do the best that I can. It does get overwhelming sometimes to be like, well, like I have to go out into the world. Like, I have it set up to where I work like 4 days a week and then I'm off for 3. And it's pretty awesome to be able to do that because, I can't even really film videos when I know that I'm, when I get done with work or whatever, because I feel like I'm just so, like, I've been in that sensory place for like so long. I have to like decompress from that. It helps a lot to like meditate when I come back from being around a lot of action. I meditate in the morning. Meditation's helped me immensely. I feel like that's one of the reasons that I've been able to stay off of drugs or get clean off of drugs. But I still have the issues with, the sensory overload. The headphones make it really easy for me to kind of like go out and just be calmer. Focus is really important for me. Like, if I'm getting overwhelmed, to, just really focus on, minute details of the things around me, rather than like being so like open to everything, like everything coming at me at once. Another thing that I'll say is that when you're around kind of like more of a draining energy, or say even a negative energy, it really helps to get moving. Like, I don't exercise too much. Like, I'd like to get more into that. But it really does help when you exercise, or when you just kind of like don't let yourself sit around if you're in a bad place, because then you're using your intuition, but it's being filtered through like your negative emotion. So you're not getting the correct information. Everything's kind of like, a little off and going through like your negative feelings. So it really helps to get moving, even just do a hobby. Like I thought about like really getting into origami or whatever. I haven't done it yet, but I'm going to see how that goes. I don't know. I don't have a whole lot of time right now. Something else that's really helped me is, focusing on being sensory, like, early in the morning, where when I go out for like a nature walk, I'll just be in nature, not even have my headphones, just kind of like pay attention to everything around me, the sky, the plants, like whatever it is, and just practice being present in that moment. I like to be around animals because they're not emotional, they're just being animals, so that helps a lot. Something that I like intuitively do is if I'm trying to focus on something, I'll shut down one of my senses. It's kind of like the same thing as, when you're trying to like find some place and you're driving, you might turn down the music, and like somehow that helps for you to focus. It's like the same thing as that. Like if I'm trying to really concentrate on what someone is telling me, I won't look at them, because then I'm just going to be like distracted by everything that's going on visually, that I can't focus on what they're saying. It's just like just a way that I've learned to cope. Deep breathing works a lot, like mindful meditation. I know a lot of people practice that, but if I'm just in a place where I'm getting like anxious, I'll just like try to take some really deep, slow breaths, and that helps a lot. It's just important to remember that you only have like, if you're an introvert at all, not even just an intuitive, but an introverted person, like you have a certain amount of extroverted energy for the day. And, you have to manage that energy wisely, or kind of like plan out your day to where you're like, okay, I'm going to be going out and doing this. So I'm going to get all my intuitive stuff done early in the morning, or I'm gonna come back home and figure out how I'm gonna decompress so that I can kind of go back into that space, or else I'm just gonna be okay with not being intuitive today. Sometimes it's like that, you just can't shut off from that. I feel like a schedule and being kind of like organized helps that a lot. Like it helps me act better in a sensory world. But it is tiring. I do find myself fatigued a lot. And sometimes I just literally come home and like stare at the wall. I'll put my headphones in and they won't even be playing anything. I'll just literally sit there and zone out and think. And I could stay like that for a really long time and accomplish nothing, or what would be accomplishing nothing to someone else. To me, it's like absolutely necessary. But I just really feel like hopefully I'll get the chance to get back into, using my introverted intuition more, because that's how I write. That, I automatic write. That's how I, do creative things. I think that a lot of introverted intuitives are artists, creatives, musicians. There's extroverted people that are too. One is not better than the other. I just feel like a majority of introverted intuitives happen to be creatives of some sort. But it just stinks to have to earn money, It stinks to have to make a way, make a living at a regular job, but you just do the best with what you have. So a lot of people say INFJs are empaths, and I feel like INTJs are also empaths. But even though they are empaths, people that are able to pick up on the emotion and thought patterns of others by just being in the vicinity, or not even having to be in the vicinity, just being sensitive to other people's energy. Yes, INFJs are definitely empaths, but I feel like INTJs are too. They just happen to be, there's a difference between being an empath and showing empathy towards someone. And I feel like INTJs are a little less inclined to show that empathy sometimes. Like, whereas an INFJ would be like wanting to show empathy to just like whoever it is, like whoever comes across. I feel like an INTJ is going to be a bit more logical, like a bit more like, oh, is this going to serve the other person for me to be empathetic to them? Is it going to serve me, or is it going to be harmful to either one of us? And they make a decision to either remove themselves from the situation or to be truthful, which sometimes hurts. But I just feel like sometimes INTJs get a bad rap for stuff like that. And it's self-preservation and it's logic. And sometimes, yeah, I feel like I should be a little less logical and a little more caring, but not if the outcome isn't, in some way positive. Like, I don't believe in like coddling someone if they're, repeating the same behaviors over and over again. I feel like in the long run, that doesn't, that only hurts them. And I'm not really helping by showing them sympathy or empathy in that moment. So anyways, so I hope this isn't too scatterbrained. I just wanted to put out a short video on my thoughts on being an introverted intuitive in a sensory world. And I'll see you later.
I believe I can see the future.